Good morning. Wait, let's try again. Good morning. Hello, friends and esteemed colleagues, and to-be friends and to-be colleagues. I am so happy to be here with you this morning. Let me ask you a question. Do we have any Eagles fans out there? Let's hear it. Eagles? Oh, just a few. Gosh, if you come all the way to Colorado. Well, that was an amazing win. And as one of my favorite people would now let us all know, the Super Bowl's over, and we can look forward to the Daytona 500 because it's officially NASCAR season. Thank you to the organizers of GeoWeek for providing us this time together, not only all throughout the week, but specifically this morning, to talk about a profound and stunning event that has underscored the critical importance of our geospatial tradecraft. Over the next hour, we'll discuss the event's implications and the contributions from our field, from the geospatial field. We'll also consider how geospatial data information has addressed issues raised by this incident just under 1 year since it occurred. At 1:28 a.m. Eastern Time on March 26, 2024, the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore suffered a catastrophic collapse after the container ship MV Dali lost power and collided with one of its piers. 6 dedicated maintenance workers lost their lives, and the incident significantly disrupted the Port of Baltimore, a vital artery of commerce in the United States. So, where were you on March 26, 2024? Do you know? This is where I was. I was hosting an event in Northern Virginia focused on one of the most damaging spies in US history ever. The nickname of the spy was Queen of Cuba, as was the book. I'm curious, does anyone out there know who this was? Okay, Ana Montes. And sadly, I actually knew her. I worked with her as a young analyst. I admired her, which was crushing for me. And the story of her treachery was deeply personal for me. As the news of the collision with the Key Bridge reached us that morning, we all knew that this incident, this tragedy in Baltimore, was going to require a lot, both immediately and over time. So, like the Queen of Cuba was personal for me, so was this incident. I'm a lifelong Marylander, so let's take another poll. We didn't have so many Eagles fans. Do we have any Marylanders out there? See 1, 2, 3. Fear the turtle? Yeah, maybe? You can see in these pictures, the Chesapeake Bay is literally in my backyard, and this gives you a glimpse of what I'm doing when I'm not working. But I digress, so let's get back to the story. All right, just after the bridge's collapse, the integration of geospatial data became indispensable. Agencies at the federal, state, and local levels collaborated using a centralized geospatial data hub and a common operating picture to coordinate rescue and recovery efforts seamlessly. The unified approach not only facilitated the swift reopening of critical shipping channels, but also highlighted the power of geospatial data, information, and collaboration. And we'll hear a lot more about this with our speakers coming up in crisis management. As we dive deeper into this morning's session, we will explore how geospatial technologies were leveraged during the rescue and recovery phases. We'll hear from experts who played a pivotal role, sharing insights into the challenges faced and the solutions implemented. Now it is my distinct honor to introduce our distinguished speakers who will come up one at a time. I'll come back at the end, and then we'll come up to the stage and have a discussion to wrap it up. So first up will be Jeremy Wasson, who is the NFIRE Technical Director at the Army Geospatial Center. He leads efforts in developing and integrating geospatial tools and systems to support military operations and humanitarian missions. His expertise in geospatial data integration and dissemination has significantly enhanced the Army's operational capabilities in diverse environments. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jeremy Wasson. If you've ever wanted to do a case study on imposter syndrome, I'm your guy. You can hit me up after this and I'll give you my info. I've served for 21 years in the Army as a geospatial engineering warrant officer, retired in 2018. Worked for Leidos and industry for a bit as a business developer, project manager in the GeoInt space. And for the last 3 years, I'm the technical director for the NFIRE program at the U.S. Army Geospatial Center. NFIRE, if you don't know, is the U.S. Army and Marine Corps engineer reconnaissance capability. My team develops the software and hardware solutions that support that mission. Just returned last week from Korea, where we're investigating and experimenting with the next version of what that looks like, and a lot of that would be of interest to this group here. We're playing with augmented reality and virtual reality and handheld LiDAR sensors, and overhead photogrammetry, ATAC, the new DAPS device, lots of really cool things coming down the pipe for engineer reconnaissance in the future. However, not the topic of this brief. On March 26th, when the bridge was struck and collapsed, I was at my home in Colorado Springs. While I immediately recognized the magnitude of this tragedy, I watched the news like everybody else and went about my week. My job typically doesn't deal with U.S. infrastructure or disaster response in CONUS. On March 31st, I flew into Dulles for a planned week of meetings and technical exchanges with my team. I went into the office on April 1st for a fairly routine day. That evening, an old friend and I met in Alexandria for a drink while his son was having soccer practice across the street. Somewhere during my second margarita, I got a call from another old friend, the Corps of Engineers Baltimore District Commander, Colonel Pinchasi. I was definitely not prepared for what was about to happen. The colonel asked if the Army Geospatial Center could provide additional geo support. As any good soldier would, my immediate response was yes, of course. I'm sure that was bolstered by the optimism and confidence that the 2 margaritas gave me. With no idea what I was going to do next, I called my boss and his boss and a few others to bring them up to speed on the situation and let them know that I'd already pledged our support. Fortunately, everybody was on board, but still, no idea what we needed to do. So this morning, we'll discuss our actions on the ground and the role geospatial technologies played in the emergency response, specifically that week of April 1st to 8th for me when I was on site. So I'm going to tell you a story. Right? Mike has some glorious slides that he's going to show you, some very technical detail. I'm just going to share with you what it was like that week on the ground as a geospatial guy. So after a brief chat with the Baltimore District Commander, I agreed to be on site the next morning at 6:30 for their stand-up briefing. That meant leaving Springfield, Virginia, quite early. 5:15, I think. Still traffic in downtown DC. That place is bananas. But I did arrive on time. It was cold and raining quite heavily in that morning, and that seemed to kind of match the mood of everybody there. The Unified Command Center, you can see this picture in the bottom left, or bottom center, is it's located in a cruise ship terminal. A place normally filled with, folks in their bags going on some amazing vacation. is now the nerve center of this disaster response. Couldn't see the bridge from the site, but it was obvious that that was the complete focus of everyone there. The evening before, I was scrambling to find a teammate to come with me. I'm more of the hype man, not the button clicker these days. At the Army Geospatial Center, we have a military support team. So folks in uniform that are geospatial engineers, and they react to all sorts of things. Staff Sergeant Jake Sarmento on that team was quick to volunteer. And although we hadn't worked together before, our shared Army experience allowed us to, speak the same words and have a common understanding of what we were doing. So without working before, we just jumped in. We came from the same place and we knew what we were doing. Our initial focus was on understanding the human landscape, simply to grasp the situation. Who was involved, what did they have, and where was it located? How could we get access to it? And how could we integrate ourselves into a team of people we've never met before? This was very ad hoc, right? So we hadn't rehearsed or trained or done anything with all these players before. Certainly not Jake or I. Maybe other folks at the Army Geospatial Center had been exposed, but we hadn't. So we started by attending their 6:30 briefing, introducing ourselves to key personnel, asking about existing data resources, inquiring about the organizational structure of this response. Who's the boss? And I'll pause there for a second. Coming out of the military, somebody's always the boss, right? You've got the colonel, the general, the somebody. This incident response was a unified command, which is such a strange thing coming from the military. Like, all these people are in charge. How can that be productive? But it truly was. Anybody that was involved in this event, it was remarkable to see shared leadership. It's a unique thing for me, but it was very impressive to see. So we quickly learned that the Baltimore district had geospatial analysts on site. The Coast Guard was in the early stages of leading the geospatial response, and NOAA had folks on site with historical data, and we're continuing to weave in new sources of data. So our next step is to establish contact with the data owners, figure out how to share data, what caveats there were to sharing, set up access to that data, and figure out how we could leverage AGC capabilities. Sharing the data is an important topic here. Some folks are collecting data that's completely unclassified, no problem, we could share that on the open internet. Unfortunately, in this situation, I come from a community where we're very hesitant to share anything on the unclassified domain, certainly not only secured with a username and password. Holy smokes. So getting our folks on board with sharing data in that open environment was certainly a challenge to overcome. I'm all over the place. Once we arrived on site, we needed our tools. Fortunately, my Infire team maintains several different types of systems for our own test and experimentation. We were able to reach back out to the team and have them bring a ruggedized Optia server, Optia workstation, GTAC laptops, and an admin laptop, plus all the stuff you need. They showed up in a big pulling cart. It was glorious to see. We had a variety of software, as you might expect. Most of the Esri suite was included. QT Modeler, Cloud Compare was ace in this event, and RevealTech's Farsight software was used as well. So we had to get set up. We needed a physical workspace and power to start with. We commandeered a large table that didn't seem to have a purpose. Soldiers are pretty good at that. We moved that into an out-of-the-way hallway where we could set up our noisy servers and systems without disrupting the rest of the command center. And initially, our connectivity was through a Wi-Fi puck that we just got lucky. Someone had thrown it in the bag of things to bring, and we had connectivity. The Coast Guard folks were running the network that was available to us, and they were super cool. They gave us a big hug, gave us credentials, brought us onto their network. and gave us access to their portal and Microsoft Teams environments so we could start coordinating. And this is early days. This is April 2nd. This event happened March 26th. So things are just, it's kind of cowboy rules at this point. But the spirit of cooperation shown by everybody was amazing. So initial focus was on getting data visualized and out to the command so non-geo users could visualize as well. And this point comes up a lot as I thought through this. This is a very technical audience, right? We've probably got some Gucci software on your machines where you can visualize everything, right? And you probably have the technical skill set to do so. But that leader, that person making that decision, may not have that requisite skill set, right? So getting your products into a environment, whatever that is, printed paper, digitally, service, however you got to do it, getting that into something that's easy to use for those folks is paramount. In the early parts of this, when we started to visualize data, we had a rudimentary viewer set up. It wasn't amazing just yet. We got to that, but this is day 3 with whatever data we could get our paws on. And initially, that was just on our box, on our little round table in the hallway. The district commander, General Lloyd, General Graham, all came and just sat at our desk to visualize the data, which is cool, right? It's always cool to have the general come sit at your desk, but that's not optimal for them, right? They need to be able to have this information wherever they are and be able to go make their decisions. So getting that into a shared portal was an immediate goal. So while I focused on making connections and gathering data, Staff Sergeant Sarmiento was working with individuals in the command post to address geospatial RFIs, which is bread and butter for folks from the Army Geospatial community. Just finding out what people need. How can I visualize those dots? Give me your spreadsheet and I'll get it on the map, right? And he's also reaching back to the AGC to coordinate the deployment of our drone pilots in the Buckeye system. I think Mike will get into this more in depth, but bringing those other resources to bear was challenging. Just coordinating through all of the airspace restrictions that existed there was a very significant challenge. So what you see here is the first batch of collections done by the Army Geospatial Center, and not to take anything away from other collections that were done. Mike and I discussed this earlier. There was some redundancy going on. Everybody's just trying to bring their tools to the fight, right? Bring your stuff. And so NOAA's collecting data, we're collecting data, and others. But that's great. It's always good to have too much data to worry about, right? So the Army Geospatial Center has drone pilots resident there. They did all the airspace coordination and then brought out a couple different collection capabilities initially. So there was an EB TAC, that foam batwing UAS, which is a really beautiful capability. And Teal Golden Eagle was used as well. Let's see. This is some additional collection ahead of the president's visit. I think the president came out twice actually, but this was before his last visit. An interesting point here in that command center. When I was there, my focus was on the unified command center, just making sure Colonel Pinchason and those other leaders in the unified command had what they needed to do on a daily basis. However, General Spellman, the Corps of Engineers commander, the president's calling him every day, right? And he's not sitting in that command center. So we've got this great display up of all this awesome data that General Spellman could probably really use. So getting that data back to the Corps of Engineers so that they could keep General Spellman up to date, that was a challenge as well, right? That's a different security enclave, it's a different domain. So we're kind of a little bit of loss of efficiency there as we're trying to feed two masters. We also deployed the Buckeye capability. those of you that are aware of it, this sits at the Army Geospatial Center. Been around for years and years and years, right? Pretty high quality stuff coming out of the Buckeye program. One of the things to discuss here is, okay, you have this extraordinary capability, but it's not terribly efficient to go collect this every day, right? We can't just go can't just fly a King Air over Baltimore every single day. So using these other assets, the Teal Golden Eagle, much easier to go fly the Teal Golden Eagle than it is to coordinate a Buckeye flight. So went through all the hoops to get Buckeye shot a few times, I believe, but then augmented that sort of change detection task, right, with the EBTAC and the Teal Golden Eagle. And here's some of the products that came out of the Buckeye system. So on the right side, I'm came from the Army, still do Army stuff. Everything I do is on land. On the right side, you see this CODA octopus data. I've never worked with subsurface data. This stuff was glorious. We saw it immediately when we got into this command post. The CODA data is exquisite sonar data. We'd never worked with such a thing before. So once we saw this, we realized the immediate value of getting this visualized, getting this into somebody's hands. But in the headquarters, all they were doing was just printing out papers with this beautiful pictures on it, which is awesome, but doesn't really give you the full power of this data. So Jake and I found out where these guys had their trailer. We took our hard drive and we just stood at their door until they finished collecting, and they put their data on a hard drive for us. We brought that back. We brought these point clouds back, and we're able to exploit them in Cloud Compare and then push them up into Esri and get them visualized. I'll show you this to show you the dirty image on top, and there's schools of fish in this data. I had no idea that was such a thing, but we were able to go in and edit out the schools of fish and get to a pretty good product there on the right side. I just thought it was a cool thing. You guys are probably pros at this. Okay, I've jabbered a fair bit. Let me conclude. So lots of valuable lessons came out of this disaster response. I will say, I don't think there's a lot that could have, I think the teamwork involved, the desire to work together, the egos getting out of the way, that's what made this successful. We could have had some planned process in place, and something would have changed it as soon as we hit the ground, right? But the desire to work together and adaptability by everybody involved, that's the good thing. The importance of accessible 3D visualization, the need for interagency communication and collaboration, which sounds terribly generic, but in this instance, this was the most important thing that we could do. Seamless data sharing wasn't immediately available, but we ultimately achieved it. And as I said, adaptability and resourcefulness were also key. Working directly with agencies like NOAA, the Coast Guard, and the Navy highlighted the need for prior understanding of how they do business. And a crucial lesson often overlooked is checking your ego and focus on providing value. It's not about creating more products, but understanding where you bring the most value. Sometimes that's facilitating access to existing data, or connecting people with expertise, or just linking folks up and getting out of the way. This experience also underscores the need for a shared, secure, and interoperable geospatial platform accessible to all relevant agencies during crisis. My own office's concerns about using an unclassified Esri portal highlight this challenge. We also need more robust training programs for geospatial professionals in emergency management, including cross-training with other agencies and training on effective collaboration and value-driven response. Finally, we must foster stronger interagency relationships and establish clear protocols for data sharing, collaboration, including joint training and clear guidelines on roles and responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.
All right, so as a former imagery analyst, I can tell you people like Jeremy are indispensable. I never met a warrant officer that I didn't love working with, and hopefully that's been your experience as well. All right, so we're going to move on to the next segment of our program, and I'd like to welcome Mike Osloskin, who is the Chief of Remote Sensing Division at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's National Geodetic Survey. And if anyone has a longer title than that, please raise your hand. All right, so with more than 2 decades of experience in remote sensing and geospatial data acquisition, Mike has been instrumental in advancing NOAA's capabilities in aerial imagery and LiDAR technologies. His leadership has been crucial in providing accurate geospatial data for disaster response and coastal mapping. Please give him a warm welcome.
Please.
All right.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here representing NOAA and some of the capabilities we have in the response to the Francis Scott Key disaster. I do want to give some props to the Army Geospatial Center. My relationship goes back into the late 90s and early 2000s, and when we were partnering with them under a program called Rapid Terrain Visualization. A lot of you folks might remember that innovative integration of INSAR or IFSAR and Topo LiDAR, and it was actually how NOAA got access to Topo LiDAR. To the point of the events of 9/11, the terrorist attacks, we were able, along with Optech and AGC, to use their LiDAR to fly both the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And in fact, we got folks in this room, including the pilot, Captain Brad Kearse, my boss, is here. Some other folks, Bill Catilius and Mike Sitar with Optech, who both flew in the aircraft and collected those data, as well as was one of the first events to bring out the ILRIS, the baselines of terrestrial LiDAR. Anyway, thanks to AGC. We have a special on them one day. Again, the title, and as we look at the title here, the value of mapping, I'd like everybody in the room within the geospatial industry to look at what was done here, pick up on what Jeremy was talking to, and see where you fit in this, because it isn't just a federal or military response or government response. It takes all the support, the sensors, the software, the people, the platforms that you provide that made this happen. So the background, again, Rhonda kind of gave you an overview here. You can read through that. I will highlight, the tragic loss of 6 construction workers. What isn't known to most folks is that had it not been for the Maryland Transportation Police, who heard the mayday of the Dali coming in and shut down the bridge, it could have been much worse. Had they not shut down the traffic coming, that loss could have been much greater, much like what happened in Tampa Bay back in the 70s. Again, you can see the impacts here, $200 million a day, idled workers. Anybody in the Baltimore area knows the traffic was and is insane. When I lived in Maryland, my parents lived up in Harford County. I drove that bridge hundreds of times. So I can just imagine not only the impact from that point, but the lives lost. And not what has been talked about much is what was bottled up in there. Military Sea Level Command vessels were bottled up in there. The Coast Guard's yard that they own also had 3 cutters bottled up in there until the port was actually reopened. So beyond the economic impacts, there was really significant national security impacts as well. So the timeline for NOAA, again, early morning of the 26th, the event happened. Immediately, what's of interest too is NOAA's National Weather Service was actually the first NOAA entities there. And they actually were waiting for the Unified Command to open. They had transited in the middle of the night from Virginia. It was waiting there to give expert weather advice to the command center. Second on scene was our Office of Response and Restoration. This is within the National Ocean Service, which I'll talk to mostly about the capabilities of the offices responded to. But again, these are the experts on hazmat and hazmat spills and the impacts for Coast Guard then to mediate, as they are the lead federal agency for any type of hazmat spill. On the 28th, the King Air, this is with my group here at National Geodetic Survey. Again, we were doing photogrammetric surveys in St. Croix. We transited and started collecting on the 28th and 29th. And that was followed on with the NRTs, the Navigation Response Team. These are mobile survey vessels that NOAA runs throughout the country. They are on site to start surveying from the hydrographic point. On the 6th of April, we deployed the Kirby buoy, which is a oceanographic instrument that provides tides and meteorological data. And then additionally, that same group who did that on the 4th and the 12th provided wind meters and meteorological instruments in order to support the pilots in navigation. So pollution support, again, scientific support to the Coast Guard. The real concern was, of course, oil, but what followed on to is there was 56 containers with hazardous materials in there, 13 of which, interestingly enough, were on the bow. So that was kind of a concern. And again, so the hazmat folks stayed there throughout the response. And they also provided trajectories, modeled trajectories every 48 hours for Coast Guard in case there was a spill. Again, from my group here in the Coastal Mapping Program at NOAA, our King Air, they again transited from St. Croix on site within 48 hours, and we collected imagery on the 28th and 29th. And you can see in the middle imagery there, the light flight line layout, again, intentionally collected for 5-centimeter data and structure for motion. Highly overlapped data across flight lines over 2 days. You can see the aircraft in the upper right there, and then our camera system down there, the Atlantic's DSS version 6. Again, the data that we collected on the 28th was mapped on the 29th and provided to the Office of Coast Office of Coast Survey to update NOAA nautical charts the next day, which all helped to enable the first passage of the vessel on the 1st of April. Again, the QR codes are active. If you could, excuse me. If you scan that, you can get to this imagery. You can see in the upper left there. Those are actually where you can actually download the data in TIFF and JPEG format. And on the right, you can see the flight lines and where they're laid out there. Again, this is publicly available data, public's website. Access challenges. Again, from us on the aircraft side, again, temporary flight restrictions around the site. State Police of Maryland were in charge of controlling the airspace. And all this happened, that same day when we were flying Baltimore Orioles opening day, TFR, special airspace restrictions, which required the pilots to go through training before they could fly in that airspace. And then you can see in the lower left there, BWI restrictions. So very complicated airspace, but you can see that it was done, and you can see the flight lines that overlaid with that aeronautical chart. Real-time data. Again, our Center for Oceanographic Operational Products and Services Co-ops, they provide port systems, which is a mixture of tide gauges, current meters, meteorological systems. So they lost equipment that was installed on the bridge. You can see that there. But in response, they deployed the Kirby system. And again, the Kirby, current profiles, surface conductivity, and then meteorological data, including wind speeds and barometric. And this was very important, especially for the dive operation and recovery there. They also provided forecast guidance under modeling. This again helped plan the operation of the removal of the debris. A big shout out goes to our navigation response team. Again, I'll go into some details, but on the water for over 20 days. And again, the initial ask for us was to help to locate the debris, but given the quality of the survey systems, the hydrographic survey systems on the vessels, that very easily transitioned into us finding alternate channels for navigation, which is shown in those black outline lines there. You can see the main channel there that was blocked. There was no vessel traffic coming in and out of there with the debris and the vessel. And again, the surveys were then focused on finding alternate paths for vessels with less draft. They also had a ship-mounted LiDAR You can see that in the bottom, and I'll show you later how some of that data was merged together with the hydrography and the SFM. Again, debris removal was the big deal, and you can see the resolution of the debris there in the center, but also some of the other items that were removed from the Port of Baltimore, as you might expect. One of the oldest ports on the East Coast, there's lots of things in there. But that vessel there on the left, you can see the Dali in the background, how close that was. Again, just that item of the debris in the main channel, and you can see some of the dimensions of that debris from the strike. There's a short video here. Again, this is the survey vessel, about a mile off, video and end. And again, we were asked to come in right after so they can start removing this. This is how they got the debris off the Dali. One of the outcomes of this was the merging of best available data. This is our national bathymetric source. And again, on the left, you can see the different sources with the blue being NOAA, the red being Army Corps, and the green being the Port Authority. But the ability to take those data and merge it into a single source of best available data then helps us expedite the building of charts. And this is what the chart updates looked like. On the far left here was the chart before the accident. You can see on April 3rd, with that iteration, you actually see the vessel there in the middle. We don't usually chart stranded vessels, but again, in this case of how many, excuse me, how much transit's happened here was very important to that. And you also can see the buoys on the upper and lower of the temporary channels in order to increase that, all culminating into where we were to the 24th when the main channel was actually opened. Again, some graphics and again, QR code there for that key response website in the middle. This showing some of the data that NOAA provided. Again, the imagery provided served as a single authoritative data set, but you can see the channels there, the Hawkins Point, the federal channel as it became open, and then the Sellers Point on the right. And all resulting in an updated electronic navigation chart here. And again, you can see where the federal channel is partially open with the red and green buoys, and then the alternate channels on either side of that, and as well as the Dali still there. So with the Opposite Coast Survey, again, 52 days of the response, 22 days of boat days there, 30 plus days in the Marine Transportation System Recovery Unit, AKA the Unified Command. And then you can see the updates and build out in order to do that. Again, the culmination, which I'll highlight here in a bit, that Jeremy alluded to about the single portal. And then, again, survey of 3 temporary auxiliary channels, and then 3 iterations of the main channels at 38, 48, and 50 foot depths. Again, 400 plus ship trends before the restoration of the main channel, and all of the impact to the port was over $15 billion diverted to other ports. Now we get some derived products. Here you can see a pre and post of structure from motion. Again, that was structure motion made from the aircraft imagery. And then merged in the data set between the hydrography and the LiDAR data sets collected from the vessel, as well as the SFM. A big shout out for this capability. Again, this is probably the first of a kind that we were aware of. We were able to link NOAA and Coast Guard shared ArcGIS environment. If anybody works within government IT, even in turn your own agency, talking to each other in this way is very difficult. This took a lot of effort, but again, at the end of the day, this gave access to shared web services across the local, state, and federal response. While an unfortunate event, this was one of the great outcomes of what happened here. And again, we're still using this today, as more recently as the DCA plane crash. So how can NOAA do better in the future? But I also ask, how does the private sector and the private-public partnership work better on this? Because these are all challenges that we have. And this is not just, Again, a local problem to Baltimore. This is a big issue across the nation that we need to look at and consider. So enhanced rapid response capabilities, densification of observations, those are key as far as having tides integrated with meteorological observations as well as current, establishing a common framework and geodetic control. Having different data and different references does not work. We need to be working from the same reference systems. New types of observations, waves, fog, webcams, and more frequent surveys. One thing that we realize that typically both us and the Corps of Engineers don't survey outside those federal channels. So the data outside the federal channel Baltimore was collected in the 1970s. So more frequent surveys in order to mitigate future events like this is what's needed. Forecast modeling, again, giving indications of what the conditions are going to be before transits. And then all this will help long-term resilience to the ports that are facing sea level change and other severe weather events. And then standardizing the one-stop destination and delivery of that data as we did with the CONOP. So the marine transportation is not adequately prepared for this. This was a wake-up call. This could have been several other types of events. It could be from a natural disaster. It could be a grounding of the critical channel as we saw in the Suez Canal in 2021. And it's not too far to say that this couldn't be, in the future, a nefarious event. And how do we prepare for that? There's major security currents as far as this that's going forward that we all should consider. And this is really kind of the scary part for me. There's 8 major bridges at risk of suffering a Baltimore-style disaster. Most notably, as you can see, the Golden Gate Bridge. Could you imagine what would happen if this happened there and shutting down San Francisco and Oakland? There's actually something called the National Bridge Inventory, and that is a hot link. And of those, only 36% are described as having functional pier protection. And that included the Key Bridge. So why is that? Well, that is because the bridge was designed in the 70s for vessels of the 70s. They weren't 1,000-foot vessels then. They were 500-foot. And so what we also have to look at is those bridges identified need to have better protections. And again, that's an interesting New York Times article there. 193 bridges that carry 10,000 vehicles a day with no protections installed. Again, all showing that there's a greater need of geospatial data to help support possible outcomes, but also service the ports for resilience. So with that, I'll close, and thanks for those who participated, and I think Ron is going to come back up.
All right, so if you didn't find that uplifting, you should, because it really underscored the importance of geospatial and what we do. So quickly, I want to bring us up to today, February of 2025, and then have a little bit of a conversation, right, talking about where we are today. So the reconstruction of the Francis Scott Key Bridge is not only about putting a new structure up, it's about reimagining the new structure, the new bridge, with a geospatial lens. The rebuild project is slated to begin this year and slated to conclude in 2028 with a price tag of $1.7 to $1.9 billion, and that's a B as in boy, like wow. And the effort is an opportunity to address those vulnerabilities that have been revealed during the collapse, and ensure that the new structure serves both today and tomorrow, right? As Mike was talking to us about the bridge when it was constructed in a 1970s mindset. And what we have the engineers working on today is looking at where we are and that potential life cycle of the new bridge. So I would say, to wrap it up, before we get to questions, that this is a powerful reminder of the indispensable role that geospatial plays in our society writ large. It challenges us to continue advancing technology, so a shout out to all of you who are doing that today. Fostering collaboration, which is something that I heard both gentlemen talk about, the importance of collaboration, and then applying our collective expertise to create a safer and more resilient environment. All right, so Mike, if it's okay if I start with you. Sure. So often we hear people say, if I knew now, or if I knew then what I didn't know, what I know now. I can't even spit that out. Based on your lessons learned, and we are about 11 months after, how have you been able to apply some of those lessons learned to other incidents that have happened since? Or have you?
Well, yeah, we recently, along with the Corps Engineers and Coast Guard, responded to the DC plane crash. And again, I think you saw a lot of the efficiencies, as Jeremy alluded to, where the data is, bringing the data together, and that working better under the unified command. While in lives lost, a more tragic event, I think the impact as far as the navigation was much smaller, but what you saw was more sharing of the data, these common operating pictures happening, folks not bringing all their tools to the trade, but leveraging those ones who are experts. So in the case of NOAA, again, the hydrographic assets, uncrewed surface vessels that came in and did the very shallow water, and similarly, the Army Corps District was there, had their UAS, as well as NTSB had their own UAS, and so the sharing of those data and then the more efficient approach to collecting those data, who were considered the experts to do that, was one takeaway from the DCA.
All right, that was really a tragic event. All right, Jeremy, so as you look back at that week that began with 2 margaritas, right? That sounds like a country song almost. What are you most proud of, and how have you pulled that forward?
Sure. See, it's good. I'm most proud of how everyone came together. Often in these environments, one team shows up and tries to establish dominance, or we're in charge and we're going to do it this way. The spirit of collaboration in that unified command was extraordinary. Coming from an Army engineer background, if we got any Army engineers in the audience, that's our vibe, right? That's what we do. We just show up and help. Maybe it's grabbing the shovel, or maybe it's taking charge. Wherever you need to fit in, you find that place and you go. So as something to be proud of, absolutely, just showing up and figuring out what we could do without trying to overstep our bounds with the other folks that were on the team, figuring out how we could bring value and not just show up and make our products because that's what we do. Extraordinary team to have been a part of. So proud just to have been asked by someone to participate, right? I guess I did something good in the early days. Taking that forward, I was very pleasantly not surprised, but it was very nice to hear when Mike is discussing this aviation incident that indeed some of those lessons were captured. We can share data better. It's glorious to look back and say, that went wrong. Okay, we fixed it. We're doing it right now. So for NOAA, the Coast Guard, and the Corps of Engineers to have a place where they can efficiently share data, that's amazing, right? That's a win for everybody to have truly captured that lesson and learned something from it.
Awesome. And in a shameless plug, we'll be having a conversation led by Carla this afternoon about what's next, right? The future of our tradecraft. Both of you showed a multitude of data sets that created insights. Mike, we have so many of our industry colleagues with us today. What data sets do you need for the next collaboration that either you don't have access to or they might not exist?
Well, I think the big takeaway from Francis Scott Key was just the data outside the federal channel. I mean, again, that's been the mindset of NOAA and the Army Corps for decades, and now we're really seeing why that data is important, not only for these alternate channels, but again, as events, severe weather events or sea level rise happen, that data is going to be imperative to understanding the impacts to the port and how they become resilient in a long time. So I would say in a lot of cases in the port infrastructure, there's the lack of data, and then there's also the lack of data of the infrastructure itself. Could it be safe to say that terrestrial mobile lidars of the bridge and possible impacts and modeling that would then inform them about where to put alternate channels and or what the impact would be to any one bridge site individually? And that's something that, again, it's done all the time in the DOTs as far as how they look at structures along roadways. I think we need to do that for the bridges as well.
All right, fair point. So Jeremy, we're gonna let you bring us home. I loved where you talked about like, that's a new bathymetric data set. Have you used more data to drive even better insights as a lesson learned from this incident? And also, you've got a captive audience. Are there data sets that you still need?
Sure, thanks. Yes, there's always more data sets that we need, right? Just last week, we were, shout out to Emicent. I think I saw Bill out here. We were using one of their devices in Korea, trying to figure out how to get that from the beautiful collection into our AR, VR environment, right? Like, how do I do this easily? And during the event, there's so many data sets being produced. We talked about this Coda Octopus data. It was beautiful. And certainly in their software, it was amazing, right? But for us to take it and then throw it in Cloud Compare and do some configuration and transformations and then get that into an Esri thing, like there's this whole process that we got to get to, right? Or got to go through. So standardizing those kind of things would go a long way, I think, in towards getting data into a common, whatever your data type is and whatever that common data format is, for us to all share. For our Primo GIS software to have its own display format, and then we view it in another format over here, and then we display it in another format over here. Those things just take away from collecting data, analyzing it, and disseminating it, right? That's all we want to do. I don't want to get hung up on 6 pieces of software to display it in different environments and all that good stuff. So if I could say anything to industry is, somebody decide on the format and let's stick with that. And moving forward, right, we're collecting all this data, these disparate data sets. I know for us, one world terrain is a concern, but whatever that translates to in the civil community, how do we get all these things that we're collecting, even with handheld sensors or overhead or all these different mediums we collect with? How do we get that into a common spot where we can go back and use it? And like Mike said, how can we go back and get other data that's been collected out of that area? There may be other data sets that were collected since 1970 that we just didn't have our paws on, right? So collecting your data and moving it up into a common shared space is huge. And I'm keenly aware that that's way easier said than done, but that's the goal, right? Let's get this into a place that we can all go pull from it later on.
All right, perfect. Well, you have been an amazing audience, and both Jeremy and Mike will be here throughout the conference. If you have questions, please seek them out. They would love to engage with you. Day 2 is off to a great start. Exhibit Hall is now open, and I hear there's coffee in Exhibit Hall. So if you would like to make your way out through these doors on your right, my left, and before you do, let's give our panelists a great big round of applause.